I stood at the altar in my $3,200 Vera Wang dress, mascara running down my face, bouquet crushed in my hand. My father held me by the shoulders, whispering that it was going to be okay, but I wasn't even sure what okay meant anymore. Brent had run. Just run. In front of 200 guests. No explanation, no goodbye. One moment we were supposed to be saying our vows, and the next, the groom had vanished through the back door of the church. Everyone stared, some with pity, some with judgment. The whispers started before the music even stopped. My mother cried. My maid of honor, Chloe, looked pale but not surprised. That should have been my first clue. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked out of the church, chin high, eyes dry. I didn't go after him. I went straight to my lawyer. At first, I thought Brent had gotten cold feet, but within 48 hours, my bank accounts were empty. Our joint savings gone. My credit cards had been maxed. And then came the worst part. A friend sent me a photo. It was Brent and Chloe, the same Chloe who had zipped me into my wedding dress, kissing on a beach in Florida, laughing, relaxed, like they hadn't just burned my entire life to the ground. I didn't scream. I didn't post about it. I filed a lawsuit. Emotional distress, fraud, financial damages. I gathered every receipt, every text, every transaction. Chloe had transferred funds from our shared accounts using fake invoices she'd made while helping with wedding plans. Brent had signed checks meant for caterers and pocketed the money. Together, they'd siphoned nearly $120,000. The media caught on. It became a tabloid frenzy. Runaway groom leaves bride broke. Everyone wanted an interview. I said nothing. I let the evidence speak in court. Brent tried to play the victim. Said I was too controlling. Said Chloe understood him. His lawyer called the wedding an unfortunate misunderstanding. But the paper trail didn't lie. Emails, fake companies, video footage from ATMs. Chloe cried on the stand. Brent refused to look at me. During the final week of trial, my own cousin took the stand. Said I was emotionally unstable and difficult to love. I realized that day how deep the betrayal went. But I never wavered. And in the end, the judge didn't either. The verdict was read in a quiet courtroom. Guilty of fraud and restitution owed in full. I won. I stood outside the courthouse, wearing black heels and a navy suit. Brent and Chloe walked past me in cuffs, escorted by 2 officers. Neither looked at me. I didn't need them to, because I never wanted revenge. I wanted justice. And I got it. I waited in my wedding dress for over an hour before I accepted the truth. He wasn't coming. The guests had started whispering. My mother kept checking her phone. My father paced the hallway. I stood there, numb, in a lace gown I would never wear again. My fiancé, Adam, had vanished. No call. No excuse. No explanation. At first, I thought it was cold feet. I was heartbroken, humiliated. But that pain turned to rage once I found out what he'd really done. Adam hadn't just run from the wedding. He'd run off with something far worse. My startup seed funding and business files. He had convinced me over the past year that we should share everything, including sensitive data. He asked me to explain my app's code, my revenue model, even introduced me to some of his investor friends. I didn't realize at the time those meetings were him fishing for contacts. Then I checked the company drive. Dozens of documents were gone. Files were downloaded on a device that wasn't mine. The NDA I had him sign? Ignored. And then came the worst part. My best friend, Natalie, stopped returning my calls. When I finally got a hold of her, she answered with a slip. We didn't think you'd find out so fast. That was all I needed. I hired a lawyer that same week. We filed charges. Breach of NDA, intellectual property theft, fraud. I brought every email, every calendar invite, every access log. Adam had used me, pretended to love me so he could copy my work and sell it to a competitor, a shady startup that launched a near-identical product 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened. Adam tried to play innocent, said it was coincidence, that I was just bitter. But in court, we showed the screenshots, my exact code, my designs, even emails between him and Natalie, bragging about how easy it was to steal from someone in love. I felt sick hearing it, but I stayed strong. The trial lasted months. Reporters picked up the story. Tech bride betrayed by fiancé and best friend. Strangers online called him every name in the book. But none of that mattered as much as the day the jury read the verdict. Guilty. I won damages. My company's name was cleared. But more than that, the judge recommended a criminal investigation for wire fraud and conspiracy. The last time I saw Adam and Natalie, they were being escorted from the courtroom. No smug smiles, no fake charm, just panic. I walked past them with my lawyer and a fresh set of investors who had been watching the case closely. They said I handled it with class. I didn't smile. I wasn't proud of what happened, but I was proud of how I finished it. He thought he was marrying into a gold mine. He forgot I built the mine myself. He walked out in the middle of our vows. No warning, no explanation, just turned around and left me standing there, humiliated in front of everyone we knew. Mason, my fiancé of 2 years, left me at the altar with a stunned crowd, a crying mother, and a heart that felt like it had been punched in the chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stared at the church doors he'd walked through and waited for someone to tell me it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was the best man, Lucas, who finally stepped forward. He gently took my arm, told me I didn't have to stay there, and drove me home in silence. I barely knew Lucas. He was Mason's childhood friend, always quiet, always watching. But that day, he didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like the only person who wasn't pretending everything was fine. 2 weeks later, Lucas called me. He said, "You need to know something. Mason was using you. And I have proof." At first, I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to hold on to some small hope that there was a reason, some messed up story that made it all make sense. But then Lucas came over with a folder full of documents and email. Mason had taken out 5 life insurance policies under my name, without my knowledge. He had used my social security number to open credit cards, fake bank accounts, even applied for a loan. All in my name. The plan, Lucas said, was to fake an accident after the wedding and cash in. On me. I sat there shaking. I didn't cry this time. I got mad. And I called the FBI. The investigation moved fast once the agents saw the evidence. Lucas gave them everything: texts, voicemails, screenshots. Mason had tried this before, but never got as far as marrying the victim. I was going to be the first. Lucky me. Court was brutal. Mason finally got caught in Arizona and brought back to face charges: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I had to sit just feet away from him and tell the judge how he planned to ruin my life for money. Lucas testified. Calm, detailed, honest. He told the court he couldn't stay silent, even if it meant betraying his oldest friend. The jury believed us. Mason was sentenced to prison, and I was awarded restitution. The money didn't fix everything, but it helped. I used it to start a nonprofit for victims of romance scams. People like me, who trusted someone they thought loved them. People who had no idea they were just part of a plan. I still think about that wedding day sometimes. The silence, the stares, the shame. But I also think about what came after. The courtroom, the truth, the justice, and the best man who helped me stand again. Dan said if I really loved him, I wouldn't need a prenup. I was raised with money. My family always told me to be careful. But Dan made me feel like money didn't matter. He said he wanted me, not my bank account. He made me feel guilty for even bringing up the idea of a contract before our wedding. "I'm not marrying your money," he said. "I'm marrying you." So I didn't push it. That was my mistake. On the day of our wedding, I walked down the aisle smiling, thinking I had found someone who truly loved me. But when I reached the altar, Dan wasn't there. Just the minister, looking confused. A bridesmaid whispered something to my mother. My heart dropped. Dan had left. Not an hour before the ceremony, he packed his things and vanished. No note, no message, nothing. I was humiliated in front of 300 guests. But the worst part came later. When I checked my accounts, over $400,000 was missing. My trust fund, which he had convinced me to move into a joint investment account for our future, had been empty. He had posed as a financial advisor to gain control of the fund, and he'd used a fake company name I'd never even heard of. I hired a private investigator the next morning. Within days, we found more. Dan had a long history, different names, different women. In each case, he got close, built trust, then vanished with their money. He'd even been engaged before. Twice. One woman tried to press charges, but he had disappeared before anything stuck. But this time, he picked the wrong person to con. We filed a lawsuit. Fraud. Identity theft. Impersonation of a financial advisor. He was tracked down in Miami using a fake ID and arrested at a luxury condo under a different alias. At trial, it all came out. He had blackmailed an old girlfriend into helping him forge documents. He had multiple fake IDs, fake companies, and a long paper trail. The courtroom was packed. Reporters came. My attorney called it one of the most deliberate and emotionally manipulative fraud cases he'd ever seen. Dan still tried to play the victim. Said I was too controlling. Said I pressured him into the relationship. But the jury didn't buy it. He was found guilty on all counts. I got my money back, and then some. The court ordered full restitution and allowed me to file civil damages. But I didn't stop there. With the help of other women he scammed, I helped the FBI uncover a whole group of marriage con artists working with him, targeting wealthy women online. We shut them down. And next time someone tells me a prenup means I don't trust them, I'll say, exactly. I thought I was about to marry the love of my life. The music played, the church was full, and I stood at the end of the aisle, heart pounding. But when it was time for the ceremony to begin, my fiancé, Mark, didn't show. The minister, a woman Mark said was a longtime family friend, stood there awkwardly in front of the guests, tears in her eyes. I was crying too. for a man who had just disappeared without a word. Everyone thought he got cold feet. I blamed myself. Was I too pushy? Did I miss signs? I didn't eat or sleep for days. Then I got a message from a stranger online. "You're not the first." That's all it said. Attached was a photo of Mark. Same smile, same eyes, but standing beside another woman at a wedding. A wedding that took place just 2 years ago. My stomach dropped. I started digging. The more I searched, the more I found. Mark wasn't just a runaway groom. He was already married. The minister at my wedding? That was his legal wife. She hadn't just helped with the ceremony. She had pretended to officiate it. The whole thing was a setup. I went straight to the police. They passed it to the district attorney. I filed charges: bigamy, fraud, impersonation. The investigation got deep. Turns out, Mark had pulled this trick before. Multiple aliases, multiple women, always wealthy, always kind. He'd get engaged, plan a fake wedding, and vanish just before it was legal, after draining money, gifts, and sometimes worse. At trial, I sat in court while he finally had to face every lie. The woman who stood as our minister tried to defend herself, said she didn't know he was still running these cons, but emails showed she had helped him cover his tracks. One victim testified that the couple had even faked a pregnancy to get money. The courtroom was silent as we listened to all the lies. I couldn't believe I had fallen for him, but I wasn't the only one. The jury didn't hesitate. Guilty. Mark and his wife were both sentenced. He went to prison for fraud and bigamy. She got charged with conspiracy and impersonation. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman. Not just from him, but from the shame I had carried for being fooled. With help from other victims, I started something new, a national registry for marriage scammers. A public record of known con artists who target people for fake relationships. We called it the vow file. I still believe in love, but now I believe in background checks too. He tried to break my heart and steal my future. Instead, I turned him into a headline and a warning. The music was playing, guests were laughing, and I was still glowing from saying, "I do." I had just married James, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. We were halfway through the reception when the police arrived. Not one or two. A full team. They walked in, found James, and placed him in handcuffs. The room went dead silent. One of the officers looked straight at me and said, "Ma'am, do you know the ring you're wearing was reported stolen?" I thought it had to be a mistake. James looked just as shocked. Or maybe he was a better actor than I thought. They took him away, right in front of our friends and family. I stood there in my wedding dress, frozen, as whispers filled the room. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stared at the empty space where my husband had been. The next few days were a blur of questions and discovery. I was interviewed by detective. Turns out, James wasn't just a thief. He was part of a larger criminal ring. The ring he gave me had been stolen during a robbery 6 months earlier. The credit card he used to pay for the venue? Fake name. The caterer? Paid with a stolen business account. Even worse, some of the items on our wedding registry had been bought using other people's identities. I was horrified, embarrassed, angry, but most of all, I wanted to help. I gave the police every email, every receipt, every bank statement I had. I showed them texts and phone records. Together, we built a timeline that showed just how deep James was in this. He wasn't some unlucky guy caught in the middle. He was running the scam. They told me they were building a RICO case, a charge usually used for organized crime. James wasn't acting alone. He had partners, and they'd been doing this for years. The case took months. I testified in court, answering every hard question with a steady voice. James sat there in a suit, pretending to look innocent. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He never expected me to fight back. The trial ended with guilty verdicts across the board. James and his partners were sentenced to long prison term. As I walked down the aisle of the courtroom, not the church, I wore the same heels I'd worn the day of the wedding. But this time, I wasn't the bride. I was the woman who helped bring down a crime ring. He thought he could marry me and steal everything. Instead, he lost everything, and I got my power back. He didn't show up on the wedding day. No call, no message, no excuse. Just silence. I waited at the altar, confused and embarrassed, while guests whispered and checked their watches. My fiancé, Jason, had vanished. I thought maybe he got into an accident. I even called hospitals. But deep down, I knew something else was going on. Later that night, I got a text. Not from him, from an unknown number. It was a photo. Jason, sitting on a beach, smiling, holding hands with a woman I knew too well. My mom's best friend, Linda. It felt like a punch to the chest. Linda had been around my entire life, holidays, birthdays, everything. I never imagined she'd run off with my fiancé. But there they were, in Mexico, acting like they hadn't just destroyed my world. I cried, for one night. Then I got to work. First, I checked our bank account. Over $90,000 was gone. The money we had saved for a home, money I had worked for. Jason had taken it all. And not just that, He had access to my small business account too. I found fake invoices, strange withdrawals, and wire transfers to someone named L. Wallace. Linda's last name. That's when I called a lawyer. We filed for damages, fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. I hired a forensic accountant. Turns out Jason and Linda had been planning this for over a year. Emails showed Linda coached him on how to guilt me into giving up financial control. Jason had signed documents behind my back. Together, they had drained me dry. The court case was ugly. Jason returned from Mexico when the charges were filed. He acted confused, said it was love, said I was vengeful. But the evidence didn't lie. They had planned everything, even the wedding. Jason never meant to marry me. It was all just a setup to make the theft look less suspicious. In court, we exposed it all. The judge listened quietly while I told my side. I spoke clearly. No tears. No anger. Just truth. The verdict? In my favor. Full financial restitution. And more. The judge referred the case for criminal prosecution. Jason and Linda were charged with conspiracy and embezzlement. Their plan ended with both of them in handcuffs. I walked out of court that day not as a victim, but as a woman who fought back. My name was cleared. My money was returned. And the man who ran away with an older woman? Now he can't even leave the country. The judge made sure of that. They called me a bridezilla. Too picky. Too controlling. Too much. That's what everyone said during the wedding plan. I wanted things to be perfect. Who wouldn't? It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But instead, I stood alone at the altar while my groom, Eric, vanished without a trace. No warning. No goodbye. Just disappeared minutes before the ceremony. I stood there in my dress, heart pounding, while the guests whispered and the flowers started to wilt. My own sister, Marissa, stood beside me as maid of honor. She hugged me, pretended to be shocked, even cried with me. But 2 weeks later, I found out the truth. Eric had left me for her. I got the news from a friend who saw them together at a doctor's office. Marissa was pregnant. And the father? Eric, my ex-fiancé. My sister had been sleeping with him for months, behind my back, while helping me plan the wedding. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a performance. I felt like my world had been ripped apart. But I didn't scream or beg. I filed a lawsuit. Emotional distress. Public humiliation. I was mocked online for it. People said I was being dramatic, still calling me bridezilla. Until court began. During legal discovery, my lawyer found texts between Marissa and Eric. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to fake a miscarriage after the wedding so I'd feel sorry for them if the truth came out. There were messages where Marissa practiced what she'd say. One even said, "She'll feel bad if I lose the baby. It'll soften the blow." That's when everything changed. Public opinion turned fast. Reporters picked up the story. I was no longer the difficult bride. I was the woman they betrayed, used, and tried to emotionally destroy. In court, I sat across from them and told my story. I spoke clearly, calmly, and with all the facts. Eric didn't even try to deny it. Marissa cried, said she was confused and scared. But I wasn't. The judge ruled in my favor. I was awarded damages for emotional distress, and the court recognized the harm they caused. My family took my side. Marissa moved out of town. Eric faded from the picture. I wrote everything down. The betrayal. The lies. The way people judged me for wanting control, when I never had any at all. The book became a bestseller. People stopped calling me a bridezilla. Now they just call me an author. Everyone showed up on the wedding day. Feet. No call, when Tyler didn't show up to our wedding. People assumed he panicked. I waited at the altar, there alone in my dress, and embarrassed, while guests whispered and checked their watches. There had been no signs. My fiancé, Jason, had vanished. No last-minute doubts. I thought maybe he got into an accident. He just disappeared. I even called hospitals, texted, but deep down, nothing. I knew something else was going on. My family helped me leave quietly. I got a text. I didn't cry in front of anyone, from an unknown number. But I did cry that night. It was a photo. A few days later, Jason, I started sitting on a beach, answers. Smiling. I hired a private holding hands with a woman. Something about his sudden disappearance. My mom's best friend, Linda. Like he knew something. It felt like a punch to the chest. Turns out he did. Linda had been around my entire life. Traffic camera footage from 2 months before the wedding. I never imagined she showed a black SUV running a red light. But there they were, hitting a woman in a crosswalk, acting like they hadn't just destroyed my world. The woman, I cried, my sister Rachel, for one night, was rushed to the hospital with a concussion. First, I checked our bank account and memory loss. Over $90,000 at the time was gone. Police hadn't the money we had saved for a home. Rachel couldn't remember anything. But the video showed the license plate clearly. And not just that, it was Tyler's car. He had access to my small business account too. He had hit my sister. I found fake invoices, strange withdrawals, and wire transfers to someone named He had looked my family in the eye. Linda's last name. Recovery. That's when I called like nothing ever happened. We filed for damages. Now I knew why he ran. Fraud, conspiracy, he knew the truth was about to surface. I hired a forensic accountant. I gave the video to the police. Turns out Jason and Linda had been planning this not just for emotional distress. Emails showed Linda coached him on how to guilt me into giving up financial control. I became a witness for my sister. Jason had signed documents behind my back. I had to sit across from the man I almost married and describe the court case left me standing at the altar. Jason returned from Mexico knowing what he had done. The charges were filed. Tyler's defense tried to confused, said it was an accident, that I was vengeful. That the guilt drove him away from the wedding. They had planned everything. His texts after the crash told a different story. Jason never meant to marry me. No one saw me. It was all just a setup to make the theft look less suspicious. He had stayed silent not because of guilt. In court, we exposed it all. He thought he got away with it. The judge listened quietly. Rachel testified while I told my side. Even with a limp, I spoke clearly. She walked into that courtroom with more strength than I'd ever seen. Just truth. She looked him straight in the eye in my favor. Full financial restitution. Guilty. And more. He was sentenced for the hit and run and ordered to pay damages to both of us. Jason and Linda were charged. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood up and said, their plan ended with both of them in handcuffs. He didn't leave me because he was scared to get married. I walked out of court that day not as a victim because he was scared of the truth, but as a woman who fought back. And now, my name was finally caught up. My money was called off the wedding 1 week, and the man who ran away with an older woman said he needed to find himself. Now he can't even leave the country. No real explanation. The judge made sure of that. No apology. They called me a phone call that ended with, too picky. I hope someday you'll understand. Too much. I sat on the edge of our bed. That's what everyone said, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts. I wanted things to be perfect. His name was Chris. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But instead, I stood alone at the altar while my groom, or so I thought, vanished without a trace. At first, I blamed myself. No warning. Maybe I was too focused on work. Just disappeared. Maybe he really was lost and needed space. I stood there in my dress, sat with heart pounding, the more something fell off. While the guests whispered and the flowers started to wilt. It began with our shared sister, Marissa. One was suddenly as maid of honor. Thousands gone. She hugged me. The savings we'd both contributed even cried first home. But 2 weeks later, I found out the truth. Withdrawal history. Eric had left. The money had been moved into a new account. I got the news from a friend who saw them together at a doctor's office. The name on it wasn't even Chris. Marissa was someone named Nathan Cole. And the father? I hired a private investigator. My ex-fiancé. What he found shocked me. My sister had been sleeping with him for months. Chris wasn't just disappearing behind my back. He had built a second life while helping me plan the wedding. A different name. It wasn't just betrayal, and even a condo in another state. I felt like my world had been fake documents to buy property, but I didn't scream flip it under other names. I filed a lawsuit. Hide the profits. Emotional distress. He had multiple IDs, public humiliation, multiple emails. I was mocked online list of secret deals. People said I was being dramatic. He had used my name and credit score to open accounts and fund some until court began. Real estate fraud, during legal discovery, identity theft. My lawyer found and he thought I'd never notice. Marissa and Eric. He picked the wrong. They weren't just having an affair. I hired a forensic accountant. They were planning to fake a miscarriage after the wedding. We built a case so I'd feel sorry for them if I provided records, emails, there were messages where Marissa practiced what she'd say. I knew how to track data. One even said, I had built a business bad if I lose the baby. If he wanted to fight, I'd give him one. That's when everything changed. His defense tried to twist the story. Public opinion turned fast. Said I was bitter, reporters picked trying to ruin his life. I was no longer the difficult bride. But the numbers the woman they betrayed, the paperwork was tried to emotionally destroy. My lawyer nailed him point by point. I sat across from them and stood calm on the witness stand. I spoke clearly, every fraudulent transfer like I was giving a business Eric didn't even try to deny it. He was found guilty. Marissa cried, sentenced for fraud, identity theft, and financial manipulation. The judge ruled I recovered most of what he took. I was awarded damages for emotional distress. Some of his assets were seized, and the court recognized the harm they caused. When it was over, family took my side. I walked out of the courtroom. Marissa moved out of town, my head high. Eric faded. He went looking for a new identity. I wrote everything down. I found mine again. The betrayal. And this time, the lies. It didn't involve him. The way people judged me for wanting control, when I never had any at all. The book became a bestseller. People stopped calling me a bridezilla. Now they just call me an author.
Hi besties. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.